The courtroom was silent. Every eye was fixed on the ex-soldier as he stepped forward, his hands trembling, his breath unsteady. His dog, a loyal companion through war and loss, lay motionless in the center of the room. This was supposed to be their final goodbye, a moment for closure. But in the next few seconds, something happened that no one in that room could have predicted. Daniel, the ex-soldier, had fought battles most could never imagine. But nothing prepared him for this. He had pleaded, fought legal battles, and exhausted every option to keep his best friend. Yet, fate had brought him here, to a courtroom, surrounded by strangers, watching as he said his final goodbye to Max, the dog who had saved his life countless times. The judge, an older man with a stern expression, cleared his throat. "Sergeant Daniels, you have 5 minutes." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. 5 minutes. 5 minutes to say goodbye to the one soul who had been by his side through fire and blood. The weight of it was unbearable. As Daniel knelt beside Max, the dog's ears twitched. His once strong body, now frail with age, barely moved. But his eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, still held the same unwavering loyalty. Daniel placed a trembling hand on Max's fur, whispering, "I'm here, buddy." Max let out a weak sigh, as if he understood. Daniel's mind flashed back to the battlefield, where Max had shielded him from danger, his growls and barks warning of threats before they appeared. The bond they shared had been forged in blood and fire, stronger than words could express. And now, in a sterile courtroom, that connection was being severed by laws that couldn't comprehend their loyalty. Then, just as Daniel braced himself for the heartbreak of walking away, Max did something that sent chills through everyone in the room. The courtroom gasped. The judge's gavel froze midair. No one moved, because in that moment the impossible happened. The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension, a silent weight pressing down on everyone present. The walls, tall and imposing, seemed to close in, the dim lighting casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the polished floor. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights, flickering slightly as if sensing the unease in the room. The judge sat motionless, his face unreadable, while the attorneys shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It wasn't just another legal proceeding. There was something different about this case, something unspoken lingering in the air. Daniel stood frozen, his pulse pounding against his temples. The cold, clinical atmosphere of the courtroom felt suffocating, so different from the open battlefields where he and Max had fought side by side. His uniform, though neatly pressed, felt heavier than usual, weighed down by emotions he couldn't name. He had faced enemies in war, had stared death in the face more times than he could count. Yet here, in this sterile room filled with polished wood and watchful eyes, he felt truly powerless. Max lay still, his breathing shallow, his once powerful frame now fragile. The light from the high windows illuminated his fur in streaks, highlighting the scars from battles long past. His presence should have been comforting, but instead, an unbearable sense of finality settled over Daniel. The dog, his savior, his protector, had no idea that this was the end. Or did he? A shiver ran down Daniel's spine. Something felt off. He glanced toward the back of the courtroom, where a few unfamiliar faces sat motionless, their expressions unreadable. The air was heavy, charged with an energy he couldn't quite explain. The judge cleared his throat, snapping Daniel back to reality. "Sergeant Daniels," he said, his voice echoing, "It's time." But as Daniel took a step forward, an uneasy feeling twisted in his gut. Something wasn't right. Daniel had always been a man of duty, a soldier first, a survivor second. His life had been shaped by discipline, sacrifice, and the horrors of war that never truly left him. He had enlisted young, trading a quiet, small-town life for the deafening roar of battle. Over the years, he had lost comrades, pieces of himself, and parts of his soul. But through it all, there had been one constant: Max. The military dog had been more than just a partner. He had been family. Together, they had braved the deadliest terrains, faced gunfire, and pulled each other from the edge of death more times than Daniel cared to count. But now, here they were, in a cold, indifferent courtroom, far from the battlefield, awaiting a different kind of verdict. His grip tightened into a fist, knuckles turning white. It wasn't fair. After years of service, Max had been taken from him, deemed government property, and left to fade away in a sterile facility. Daniel had fought against it, pushing through endless bureaucracy, making calls, filing appeals, until finally he was given this moment. One last goodbye. But something gnawed at him, an unease he couldn't shake. Was this really just a farewell? Or was something being hidden from him? In the rows behind him, an older man sat quietly, watching. Daniel barely recognized him at first, but then the memories surfaced. General Harper, the man who had overseen their missions. What was he doing here? There had been no word from him in years, yet now he sat in silence, his expression unreadable. Beside him, a woman Daniel didn't know clutched a folder tightly against her chest. She was tense, as if holding on to something too dangerous to reveal. Daniel's heart pounded. Why did it feel like there was more to this than just a simple goodbye? As the judge cleared his throat again, Daniel cast one last glance at Max, who stared back with deep, knowing eyes. And then, just for a second, Daniel could have sworn he saw something. An urgency, a silent warning in the dog's gaze. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't over. Not yet. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom, calling for order, but Daniel barely heard it. His focus remained locked on Max, the dog who had been by his side through life and death. But something was wrong. Max wasn't just sitting still, he was alert, too alert. His ears twitched at sounds no one else seemed to notice. His body was tense, his deep brown eyes darting between Daniel and the people behind him. It wasn't the behavior of a dog who was simply awaiting a reunion. It was the behavior of a soldier still in battle. Daniel swallowed hard, forcing himself to look around. The courtroom felt colder than it should have. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows on the polished wooden floors. Something about the air felt off, like a storm was about to hit, even though it was a clear day outside. The woman with the folder shifted uncomfortably. He caught her staring at Max, her fingers gripping the edge of the folder so tightly that the paper inside crinkled. Daniel didn't miss the way General Harper placed a steadying hand on her arm, as if silently telling her to keep quiet. The judge continued speaking, listing out the legalities of the case. How Max had been classified as government property, how military dogs were reassigned after their service, how Daniel's request to adopt him had been denied repeatedly due to security concerns. Security concerns? That made no sense. Max was just a dog. A loyal, battle-worn, and brilliant one, but still just a dog. So why did it feel like there was something more? Something they weren't telling him? Then, as if on cue, Max let out a low growl. It wasn't directed at Daniel. It was directed at someone else. Daniel followed his gaze, straight to the man sitting 2 rows behind him. A man Daniel hadn't even noticed until now. He was dressed in a dark suit, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. But Max's reaction said it all. This man was a threat. A slow, creeping dread settled into Daniel's bones. He knew Max better than anyone, and Max never reacted this way unless there was danger. His heart pounded against his ribs as the judge's voice droned on, oblivious to the tension mounting in the room. Daniel didn't wait. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I want the truth," he demanded, his voice sharp. The judge paused mid-sentence, startled by the sudden outburst. General Harper's expression hardened. The woman with the folder stiffened, her knuckles turning white as she clutched the documents even tighter. The man in the suit? He didn't react at all. That was the most unsettling part. The judge sighed, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Calloway, this proceeding is merely a formality. You were granted a final moment with your former companion. Nothing more. Final moment." The words made Daniel's stomach churn. Why did it sound like they were preparing for something permanent? "Max is more than a dog," Daniel shot back. "And you all know it. What aren't you telling me?" Silence. The kind that stretched too long. The kind that confirmed his suspicions. Then, finally, the woman with the folder inhaled sharply. It was as if she had reached a breaking point. Her fingers trembled as she opened the folder, revealing a stack of papers with a large, red-stamped word at the top. Classified. Daniel barely had time to process it before she spoke. "Max isn't just any military dog," she said, her voice low but firm. "He was part of a classified program. He's different. Different." The word lingered in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Daniel's pulse quickened. He had seen Max in action, seen the way he could anticipate threats before they happened, how he reacted faster than any normal canine ever could. He had assumed it was just training, instincts honed through years in the field. But now he wasn't so sure. "What do you mean different?" Daniel pressed, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman hesitated, glancing at General Harper for approval. The older man sighed, rubbing his temples before nodding. Whatever secret they had been guarding, it was about to come out. "Max wasn't just trained for combat," she admitted. "He was enhanced." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Enhanced? The word felt foreign, unnatural. "You're telling me he was experimented on?" The woman flinched at the accusation, but she didn't deny it. "We don't have time for this." The man in the suit finally spoke, his voice cold. "This conversation never should have happened." Max let out another growl, his entire body tense as if ready to attack. Daniel had never seen him like this, not even in the heat of battle. He could feel it in his gut now. Something was coming. Then the courtroom doors burst open. Security officers flooded in, their faces tight with tension. The judge stood, alarmed. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. One of the officers turned to the man in the suit. "Sir, we have a problem." The man's jaw tightened. "What kind of problem?" The officer hesitated, his hand gripping the radio at his hip. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he muttered, "The dog is compromised. We have orders to contain the situation." Daniel's blood ran cold. Contain? He didn't wait for an explanation. Without thinking, he lunged toward Max, grabbing hold of his collar just as the officers reached for their weapons. His instincts screamed at him, "Run." But there was nowhere to go. "Don't do this," Daniel warned, his grip tightening on Max. "He's not a threat." The man in the suit stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then, with an eerie calmness, he said, "That's not your decision to make." Daniel's heart pounded. He could feel Max's muscles tensing beneath his hands, the dog ready to act on instinct. If he didn't do something now, he was going to lose him forever. And then, in a single, terrifying moment, everything fell apart. The air in the courtroom had changed. It was subtle, but Daniel could feel it, like the heavy stillness before a storm. The security officers hadn't moved yet, but their hands hovered near their weapons. Max remained tense at his side, his ears twitching at sounds no one else seemed to notice. Every instinct in Daniel's body screamed that something was about to happen. He just didn't know what. The judge, normally composed, now looked uneasy. His fingers drummed against the desk, his eyes darting between the suited man and the security team. The woman with the folder clutched the documents as if they could shield her from whatever was coming next. Even General Harper, a man known for his unshakable demeanor, had shifted in his seat. They were all waiting for the moment someone gave an order that would change everything. Then the suited man spoke. "Step away from the dog, Mr. Calloway." His voice was level, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something cold. Daniel didn't move. "Tell me what's really going on." The man sighed, as if Daniel had disappointed him. He gave a slight nod. Two of the officers took a step forward. Max let out a sharp bark. Not just any bark, a warning. His body tensed, his eyes locked onto something beyond the security team. Daniel followed his gaze, his pulse spiking. Max wasn't looking at the men moving toward them. He was looking past them at the judge's bench. Daniel frowned. The judge? No, something else. His breath caught as he noticed it. The shadows. They had shifted. It was so small, so easy to miss. But now that he was looking for it, he saw it clear as day. The shadow behind the judge's chair had grown darker, deeper, and then, as Daniel watched, it moved. A chill crawled down his spine. That wasn't possible. The lighting in the room was steady. There was nothing that could cause a shadow to shift like that. And yet, it had. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Max's growl deepened, his fur bristling as he lowered his body in a defensive stance. His reaction sent a fresh wave of unease through Daniel. Max never reacted this way unless there was a threat. One of the officers grabbed his radio. "Sir, we have a..." The lights flickered. Not just a small flicker. A violent, stuttering flash that made the entire room seem to distort for a second. The microphone on the judge's desk screeched with static. The woman with the folder gasped, taking an instinctive step back. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the lights stabilized. The courtroom looked the same. Everything was in place. But Daniel knew. It wasn't the same. His pulse thundered as he scanned the room. Nothing had technically changed. And yet, the air felt wrong. The space felt altered, like something had shifted just out of sight. Then, the suited man gave another order. "Take the dog. Now." The officers lunged. Max reacted. A blur of movement. A snarl. A chair toppling over. Daniel barely had time to process what happened before Max knocked one of the officers to the ground. The second officer tried to grab him, but Max was too fast. He twisted out of reach, his teeth bared. The courtroom erupted into chaos. "Control your animal, Mr. Calloway," the judge barked. But Daniel wasn't listening. He was too focused on the shadows. They were moving again. Not just shifting this time. Stretching. Daniel's breath caught as a shape emerged from the darkness behind the judge's bench. It was subtle at first, just a ripple in the air, like heat rising from pavement. But then a figure that shouldn't be there. The suited man saw it. His mask of control cracked for the first time. His hand flew to his earpiece. "We have a breach," he muttered. "Contain it." But it was too late. The shadow twisted, contorting into something that shouldn't exist. It flickered, 1 second humanoid, the next a shifting mass of darkness. And then it moved, faster than anything human. The judge didn't even have time to scream. The shadow engulfed him, swallowing his form in an instant. Papers flew. The woman with the folder shrieked. The officers scrambled backward, their weapons drawn, but there was nothing to shoot at, only darkness. Daniel's blood ran cold. He grabbed Max's collar. "We have to go. Now." The suited man turned to him, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come here, Calloway." Daniel didn't wait for an explanation. He bolted. Max stayed close at his side as they sprinted for the courtroom doors. Behind them, the lights flickered again, this time staying off. The last thing Daniel heard before he reached the exit was the sound of the judge's gavel hitting the desk. But the judge was already gone. Daniel didn't stop running. His boots pounded against the polished courthouse floor as he sprinted down the hallway, Max keeping pace at his side. Behind them, the courtroom had descended into chaos. Panicked voices, the screech of overturned chairs, the muffled sound of something not human moving in the dark. The lights overhead flickered violently, sending long, shifting shadows across the walls. The front exit was just ahead. Daniel pushed harder, heart hammering against his ribs. He could hear the security officers shouting behind him, but their words were drowned out by the piercing sound of something scraping against the walls. A deep, guttural sound. Not a growl, not a voice. Something else. Max let out a sharp bark, his hackles raised. He knew. He sensed it. They weren't alone. Daniel reached the doors and shoved against them. They didn't budge. Locked. A cold wave of dread washed over him. No, this wasn't happening. He turned, searching for another way out. But the hallway behind him was already different. The walls seemed closer. The ceiling felt lower. The windows, which should have been showing the outside world, were nothing but black voids. And then, slowly, the darkness moved. From the far end of the corridor, a shape unfolded. A figure, featureless yet shifting, watching. Max let out a vicious snarl and lunged forward, but Daniel yanked him back just in time. "No," he whispered. "We don't fight this." The suited man from the courtroom suddenly appeared from a side door, stepping into view like he had just walked out of nothingness. His tie was askew, his face slightly pale, but he didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "It won't let you leave," he said. Daniel's breath came fast and uneven. "What the hell is it?" The man hesitated. "Something old. Something that doesn't care about laws, rules, or who's right or wrong. It's been here longer than this building. Longer than this city." He glanced toward the shifting darkness. "And it doesn't like interference." Daniel clenched his fists. "I just wanted to see my dog." The suited man let out a hollow laugh. "You still think this was about you?" Daniel's stomach twisted. He turned to Max, his loyal companion, the only thing he had left in the world. Max was still growling, but his eyes were wide with something deeper than fear. Recognition. The darkness moved, not toward Daniel, toward Max. "No!" Daniel grabbed onto his dog, wrapping his arms around him. The darkness stretched, reaching with shifting tendrils, twisting the very air around them. Max struggled in his grip, barking wildly, but Daniel wouldn't let go. He wouldn't lose him. Not again. The suited man stepped back. "You were never supposed to bring him here." A chilling realization slammed into Daniel. This wasn't about him. It was about Max. His dog, the only survivor of that classified military mission. The one who had been there that night. The one who had walked away when no one else did. Max had seen something back then, and it had finally come for him. Daniel's vision blurred as the tendrils of darkness coiled around them, pulling, dragging. His grip on Max tightened, but his strength was fading. The world around them was dissolving, walls stretching, doors vanishing, the very floor beneath them becoming something else entirely. Max let out a single piercing howl, and the darkness stopped, just for a second. That was all Daniel needed. He reached into his jacket, his fingers closing around the only thing he had left from that mission. A small, battered dog tag, Max's original military ID. He yanked it out and threw it into the black void. The reaction was immediate. The darkness recoiled, twisting violently, pulling back as if burned. The suited man shouted something, but his voice was drowned out by the high-pitched shriek that filled the air, an unnatural sound that rattled the very walls. And then silence. The lights flickered one last time, then stabilized. The hallway was back. The courthouse doors were open. Max was still in Daniel's arms, trembling but unharmed. The suited man adjusted his tie, his expression unreadable. "You got lucky." Daniel didn't respond. He was already walking toward the exit, Max pressed against his chest. He wasn't waiting for explanations. As he stepped outside, the fresh air hit him like a shock. The world was still there. The sun was still shining. People were walking past, unaware of what had just happened inside that building. Daniel didn't look back. He wasn't coming back. But as he reached his car and set Max down in the passenger seat, he couldn't shake one last thought. That thing, it hadn't been stopped. It had just let them go. For now. Daniel sat motionless in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His breath came in uneven gasps as his mind replayed everything that had just happened. Max lay curled beside him, his fur damp with sweat, his chest rising and falling in slow, exhausted breaths. The courthouse loomed in the rearview mirror, an unassuming structure of stone and glass. To anyone passing by, it was just another government building. But Daniel knew better. It wasn't over. He reached down, running a shaking hand over Max's head. "We made it," he murmured, but the words felt hollow. The pit in his stomach refused to settle. They hadn't escaped. They had been allowed to leave. And that was what terrified him the most. His mind replayed the suited man's cryptic warning. "You were never supposed to bring him here." The words felt heavier now. What had Max witnessed that night? What had followed them back? A part of him wanted to turn the car around, march inside, and demand answers. But deep down, he knew some truths were better left unknown. As he shifted into gear, a flicker of movement caught his eye. In the side mirror by the courthouse doors, a figure stood perfectly still, watching. His pulse spiked, but when he turned his head, there was nothing there. A cold shiver crawled down his spine. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. Maybe. But as the car rolled forward, leaving the courthouse behind, the feeling remained. Something was still watching, and it wasn't done with them yet. What do you think really happened in that courthouse? Was it just paranoia? Or was something truly lurking in the shadows? And most importantly, was Daniel ever supposed to leave? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story sent a chill down your spine, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps us bring more eerie stories your way. And if you love suspense, horror, and mind-bending mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. But before you go, ask yourself this. If you were in Daniel's place, would you have stayed to find out the truth? Or would you have left knowing something was still watching? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll be reading them. And remember, sometimes the things we fear most don't stay behind. They follow. See you in the next mystery.